France was completely broke. After the death of Louis XIV, the kingdom owed more than 2 billion livres, roughly half of its entire yearly tax revenue. The gold had run out. The bankers had stopped lending. So a Scottish gambler walked into the royal palace and made a simple promise: "I will turn paper into money." This is unseen hand. Most people who talk about the Mississippi bubble tell you it was a classic case of investor greed. A bunch of French people got excited about land in America, bought shares, and then lost everything when the bubble popped. That story is convenient and almost entirely wrong. The Mississippi system was not the result of wild speculation. It was the first time in recorded history that a government took its entire national debt, handed it to one private company, gave that company a total monopoly on taxes and trade, and then forced the entire population to use the company's printed paper as money. And it worked for almost 4 years. The year is 1716. Louis XIV, the Sun King, has just died after a 72-year reign. He left France with a debt of approximately 2.4 billion livres. Annual tax revenue was only about 200 million. The interest payments alone were swallowing the entire budget. No one in Europe would lend to the French crown anymore. The regent, Philippe II, Duke of Orléans, was desperate. Into this crisis steps John Law. Law was not a random con artist. He was a Scottish mathematician who had spent years studying probability and money. In 1705, he published a book called Money and Trade Considered. His central argument: money does not have to be gold or silver. It can be paper, as long as people believe the issuer will honor it. He had already run similar experiments in Scotland and Italy. Both had failed, but France in 1716 was different. It was broken enough to try anything. Law met the regent and made an offer: create a private bank that would issue paper notes backed by land. The notes would be more convenient than gold and would expand the money supply, stimulating trade. The regent approved. In 1716, Law founded the Banque Générale, later renamed Banque Royale. It was France's first central bank. People deposited gold and received paper notes in return. The bank then lent those notes out at interest. At first, it worked. The notes traded at a small premium to gold. People began to trust paper. But Law had a bigger plan. In 1717, Law founded the Compagnie d'Occident, the Company of the West. He was granted exclusive rights to develop all of French Louisiana, a territory that stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. He was also given a monopoly on the fur trade, tobacco, and several other colonial goods. In 1719, the company absorbed several other failing French trading companies and became the Compagnie des Indes, the Indies Company. It now controlled almost all French overseas trade. At the same time, Law took over the Royal Mint and began issuing new coins with lower silver content. Classic debasement. Here is where the architecture becomes truly sophisticated. In 1720, the Mississippi Company made an offer the French government could not refuse. It would take over the entire national debt, every single livre the crown owed, in exchange for shares in the company. The government accepted. Now the Mississippi Company owed the debt. But it paid the interest not with gold, but with its own printed shares and banknotes. To make sure the notes circulated, the government passed a law. Taxes could only be paid with Banque Royale paper notes. Gold and silver were no longer accepted for tax payments. This single decree was the key. It forced every taxpayer in France to acquire Law's paper money. Demand for the notes exploded. At the same time, the company kept issuing new shares to pay dividends on the old shares. It was a textbook Ponzi. By early 1720, the share price had risen from 300 livres to more than 10,000. Law himself briefly became the richest man in Europe. The scheme began to crack in the summer of 1720. People started demanding to exchange their paper notes for gold. The bank did not have enough gold. Law tried to slow redemptions by lowering the official price of gold and limiting how much could be withdrawn. The market saw the move for what it was, an admission that the paper was overissued. Panic selling began. Share prices collapsed from 10,000 to under 500 within weeks. Law was forced to resign. He fled France in December 1720, disguised as a coachman. The company's privileges were stripped. Paper money was banned in France for more than 80 years. The faces change. The strategy does not. What John Law built was not some unique 18th century fraud. It was the first modern system of sovereign debt monetization. Compare it to 2020-2022. Central banks bought trillions in government bonds with newly created reserves, exactly the same debt-to-equity conversion Law performed. Governments forced new digital payment rails and CBDC pilots while restricting cash, echoing the decree that taxes could only be paid in Law's paper. Asset managers and SPACs issued new shares at ever higher valuations based on future growth with almost no current earnings, the same continuous issuance that kept the Mississippi bubble inflated. And every time a central bank promises that inflation will remain transitory while the money supply expands, it is telling the same story Law told in 1719. Trust the paper. The real assets will come later. The question is never whether a new monetary architecture can work. It is how long the population will continue to accept paper claims on wealth that no longer exists. If this gave you a new perspective on how money and power actually work, hit subscribe. History has the answers. We show you where to look. This is Unseen Hand.